Last but not least, we have a session with Jörg Rocholl, President, European School of Management and Technology. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, good evening, and thank you very much for inviting me. I do not have PowerPoint slides, given that my experience with our students is that they appreciate actually speeches or presentations without PowerPoint slides more than those with. So therefore, I will basically go through my speech without those slides. And I would first like to say congratulations to the organizers for bringing together this conference, for the great initiative on working on how to further improve e-government in Egypt. And I would like to speak about the experience of East Germany, so how East Germany has developed over recent years. And the key element for this, the key element to look at is the question of what happened in 1990, right at the time when two economic systems were about to be integrated. The key question at that point of time obviously was, what is the right exchange rate for the currency that should be integrated? And there were long debates on that at that point of time, but there's still very intense debate on this today, whether it was the right or the wrong move to actually use the exchange rate that was used. The official exchange rate that was used changed between 1 to 1 or 1 to 2, dependent on the type of liability or claim. What is more important is that the real, if you want to say, market rate was rather at an exchange rate of 1 to 6 or 1 to 7. So this means, as a consequence, that whatever was there as production in the GDR, so in East Germany, came under heavy pressure, given that now all of a sudden the products that were coming out of East Germany could not compete anymore on world markets. So this led actually to a 50% reduction in industrial production in a very short period of time, a dramatic increase in unemployment in this period of time, and massive challenges that had to be faced by the unified Germany. So in that sense, the starting situation was a very challenging one. It was a very difficult one. And it led to lots of questions of what actually could be done. Now, there was not only this question, but it was also a question of to what extent wages should increase. And I think one can say today that wages did increase too quickly in East Germany, so even furthering or contributing even more to the lack in competitiveness that many companies faced. And there was also the lack of demand from many of the traditional export markets in Eastern Europe, Central and Eastern Europe, that underwent similar transformation processes and thus were not able to acquire, not to demand the same amount of products and services as before. So, as I said, a dramatic decrease in industrial productions. In production, in many cases, people were very concerned that there was an overarching increase or inflow of Western products so that Eastern products would not be competitive anymore. Now, to just give you one idea of this, so the population of the GDR at about 16 million at the time of the unification. And when you just look at the number of short-time workers, so apart from the real unemployment, the number went up immediately, quite dramatically, to 1.6 million in the former GDR. So this means 10% of the population, even more of the workforce, did go into short-time working contracts, so contracts in which they were not fully employed. The So in that sense, it was a real shock. It was a shock to the economy. It was not possible to gradually adjust to a new system, but rather a very dramatic decrease and a very dramatic shock to the economy. Obviously, one could have thought about the following. One could have thought about delaying privatization, but that would have created even other problems in the sense that privatization or the lack of privatization would be unfair to those companies that actually would be acting in private markets. So therefore, distortion of competitiveness that would be coming into this. So just in a nutshell, overall, 10,000 companies were privatized. At the same time, 3,700 companies were closed down. So this means a substantial part of all those companies was closed down. And the government agency that was in charge of reforming, of privatizing these companies, that was first expected to really generate substantial gains due to the ability to sell these companies, it finally incurred a loss of 264 billion Deutschmark, so which is about 140 billion euros, so a substantial amount that was incurred as losses at that point of time. Various attempts were obviously made to revitalize the East German economy, in particular in those years following the unification. So we could observe a rather positive development for the first couple of years, a catching up of productivity, of wages and so on. But, and this is really the alarming effect here, the unemployment rate went up to more than 18% until 2005. So 2005 was the year in which the unemployment rate hit at the peak. This compares at the same time to an unemployment rate which still was very high at that point of time of West Germany of 10%. So a substantial difference between the unemployment rates in the two countries. So therefore, the question is, why does it look better today? And for that, I would like to concentrate on one reform package that is very important in my view, which is the reform package of the so-called Agenda 2010 that was introduced in 2003 by the government under Chancellor Gerhard Schröder. The Agenda 2010 reflected the need to reform the German economy and actually to make the German economy competitive again. As I said, unemployment rates were at a record level. In 2002, economic output did not grow anymore. In 2003, economic output in real terms even decreased. So it was a situation that had far-reaching consequences. What were the reforms that were part of this Agenda 2010, out of which I'm sure Germany still benefits today? First of all, it has to do with the labor market. The labor market to increase incentives for those who seek work, to actually, and that obviously also had social implications, to put pressure on those who currently not work and receive their income from social subsidies to actually go and start working. Second, to increase you could say the brokerage between labor demand and labor supply, so to make the federal agencies for work more efficient and ask them to be quicker in bringing people back to work once they're looking for a job. There were further reform steps, in particular the increase of the reform, the pension age, gradually from 65 to 67 years. There were increases also in the value-added tax to consolidate the public finances, so the sovereign budget. And in particular, there was also an agreement between the trade unions and the employers to keep increases in wages at a rather low level. So to have an agreement on the fact that companies would just increase the costs of labor at a lower rate than in other countries, given that many had criticized the introduction of the euro to be associated with a too high exchange rate for Germany. So in that sense, this too high exchange rate that we already observed in the GDR in 1990 to be repeated at the point of time of the introduction of the euro. Just to show you some of these effects of this Agenda 2010. So in particular, it led to a massive increase of those who otherwise would have not been able to participate in the job market. So in particular, when you look for a periodic employment, in German called Zeitarbeit, this went up dramatically from 300,000 to 800,000. So those who came into the job market back, many of whom might have not been able to come back to the job market, this number increased dramatically. There were also so-called mini jobs, so jobs with a rather low involvement. This means rather low number of hours to be worked. And also this number of the so-called mini jobs went up very extensively. There were other reforms in the social system. Various ways of providing social subsidies were harmonized in order to increase increase in efficiency, to make it more transparent, and also to just avoid the transfer of those who receive these subsidies from one way to the other. So this means overall a very comprehensive package that was decided upon in 2003, and that no matter to what extent one agrees or not agrees with all the efficiency of these measures, certainly was one key driver in the economic recovery that Germany saw after those years, and that also in particular was a benefit to East Germany. I will not go through all the details, but then there were other questions of, for example, how to stabilize the health insurance, how to stabilize the pension system, so to make sure that there's a sustainable factor in the pension system, that pension payments would not just keep increasing due to demographic change. There was also an introduction of more incentives to the health insurance system, so one element that in the meantime has already been reversed, to say that whenever you go to a doctor, you would first have to pay a fee, reducing the incentives for everyone to just go there whenever and basically reducing the need to go there only whenever it is needed and not in any other case. So just to provide you with the overall tendency, the situation, and now in particular looking at East and West Germany in comparison. The population in Germany overall between 1991 and 2013 has increased by 0.6% from 80.2 million to 80.8 million. But there are two very different developments in the two parts. So in East Germany, the population went down from, and this excludes Berlin or East Berlin, it went down from 14.5 to 12.5. So a 2 million decrease in population, 14%. In the West, it went up from 59, about 60 million, to 62.4 million. And this, despite the fact that even in West Germany, there was, as you could, I think it's referred to as reproduction rate, is just 1.4. So there were only 1.4 children per woman born. So this means, naturally speaking, also the population in West Germany would have decreased, but due to this strong migration from the east to the west, this decrease has been more than offset. In fact, there was even an increase in population. So this means when we look at the comparison 2013 to 1991, all West German federal states saw an increase in population between 4 and, in fact, 17%, while all East German states saw a massive decrease in population, ranging between 10% for Brandenburg and 21% for Sachsen-Anhalt. There are some elements but that are certainly very much worth considering for East Germany. And one element is that even before the unification, the female participation in the job market was much more pronounced than it was in West Germany. So this means women had a much higher chance to be employed in the East than they had in the West. And this is, interestingly, still the case. So there's still a higher tendency for work participation of women is still much higher in the East than in the West. When we look at income, the income had seen a very strong catch-up effect between 1991 and 1996, but since then not much has happened in addition. So this means when we look at the income ratio, it was at about 45% in 1991. So this means on average in the East, employees earned 45% of the West employees. This went up to 75% about in 96, 97, and this has more or less stayed at this level, at 75% in the years to come. Still, there are some substantial differences in various parts of the economy. So for example, if you look at agriculture, the fact that many of the, or say almost exclusively, everything in agricultural area in East Germany was owned by the state and was just also ordered in bigger conglomerates. Still, the average size of agricultural companies is much larger in East Germany than it is in the West. Second, the average age now is higher in East Germany than it is in the West because it's, as I said, there was this migration between the East, from the East to the West. So you see now a much larger, or say much higher average age than the East than in the West, given that many highly qualified young workers left the East and tried to find a job in the West. Something again where East Germany is a role model for West Germany is full-time daycare of children. So full-time daycare for children is much higher, substantially much higher for East Germany than it is for West Germany. And despite various changes in legislation in the West, it remains so even at this point of time. Looking at the population growth, which is in fact, I will come back to this, is in fact one of the very important developments that we see. If you look at the average number of children born per woman in East Germany, there's a dramatic decrease around the German unification. So this number used to be at about 2. This was in 1980. It was at about 1.5 in 1990, and it went down to 0.75 in between 1990 and 95. So basically the number of children born per woman was very low. Thus also the demographics changed quite extensively. Looking at where the two parts stand today, a couple of interesting aspects stand out. One is there's still a striking difference in wealth. So the average wealth in the West per capita is 140,000 euros, while it's only 60,000 euros in the East. And this applies both to liquid assets, securities, and real estate. However, there are also examples in which East Germany has done quite well. So when you look at the production sector and its relative share in the overall value addition of the economy, East Germany had a share of 17.3% for this part, which is actually quite high if you compare it to other G7 countries. It's still lower than in the west of Germany, but it is, for example, comparable to Japan with 18.2%. So this means the producing sector plays a very important role. The difference between its share in East and West Germany now is only at 5.7%. It used to be at 14% in 1991. So this means the producing sector has gained a lot in importance and is coming closer to the West German level. Also, when you look at purchasing power adjusted figures for the gross domestic product per capita, East Germany is now somewhere on the European average. So it is not anymore lagging substantially, but it's now on the European average. If you take the norm of 100, it is about at a level of 93, comparing to Spain 95, Italy 98. So this is showing that there has been a real catch-up effect in there. Also, regional differences, which is probably the more important part, the regional differences are not that pronounced, but rather now you will also see areas in East Germany that are better developed than some regions in West Germany. So some regional disparity that used to be there and that will always stay there. A couple of more thoughts on the migration, on the demographics, which is in fact probably one of maybe the key issue. Between 1990 and 2012, on a net basis, 1.8 million inhabitants left East Germany and went to the West. And this is an effect that not only took place right after the unification, but even after 2005, there were 300,000 who left. Still, and this will be a second point to which I will come in my conclusion, still the innovation ability of East German companies is not as high as the innovation ability of West German company. So just to take a look at the years 2010 to 2012, only 24% of East German medium-sized companies had introduced new products, new production processes. And this 24% relates to 31% of the same types of companies in West Germany. So therefore, to conclude or to come into those two elements that remain important and that will take in particular the attention of policymakers, clearly economists as well, are two. One, how to increase the innovativeness of companies in East Germany, to how to make them really research and development driven companies, how to increase the number of patents, the expenses they spend on research and development. And second, how to help East Germany in its demographic development. So as I mentioned, the decrease in the population, in particular in the young population, is a real challenge to the further economic development. Thus, to bring it together, it is very important to keep the investments up and keep in particular the investments up in those parts of the public sector that are responsible for innovation, which is in particular universities, research institutes. So when there's now discussion on how can we actually scale back public infrastructure in response to a decrease in demographics, it's very important to scale back on those dimensions that are not research dependent, or put it differently, it's very important, despite the fact that the scaling back takes place, it's very important to keep the investments up or maybe even increase them in education, in investments and in R&D. So this means we just celebrated last Saturday the 25th anniversary of the German unification. A lot has been achieved, in particular given that no one was fully aware at that point of time how run down the East German economy was, how uncompetitive the East German companies were at that point of time. But we now see that a lot has been achieved, but certainly whoever may have hoped at that point of time to reach the full level of East German, to reach in East Germany the full level of West German competitiveness of standards of living, this has not been achieved yet, and therefore it's even more important to keep the way. But at the same time, there are very promising examples of certain cities, of certain areas in which this development has taken place, in which there is a high research culture in universities, in highly productive companies, and this is what shall be or should be focused on to keep the regional disparity more an eye on regional disparity, on regional focuses and put the regional focuses, and not just hope that all regions all over East Germany will have the same standard of living. So with this, thank you very much for your attention, and I'm very happy to take questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jörg, for your presentation. Jörg actually is the president of ESMT, the #1 executive education university in Germany and #3 in Europe. And he's an economic advisory board member for the Ministry of Finance. So if I ask you, what do you think the economic advice that you would give to Egypt, given the presentation that you've heard over the last day or so?
I mean, first of all, I appreciate very much this conference. This is great. It's a great initiative. It's something where I can see the initiative coming from the private sector, from those also working in the private sector, trying to see how they can help the government. And I think that is really what is needed. The private initiative to be supported, the private initiative to come about, because in the end, also the success in East Germany, the success in West German companies came from private entrepreneurship, and the government should just make sure that entrepreneurship is supported and entrepreneurship can really unfold its great potential.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll open the floor for questions. If we have any questions. Okay, so thank you very much, Jörg. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.